This video is all about the cost of living in Vancouver, and we all understand that Vancouver is an expensive city, but exactly how expensive is it? Well, I'm going to break down all of your potential expenses in this video, from utilities to groceries to transportation. And at the end of this video, I'm doing a deep dive into housing as well. So you get a true picture of what it's like to live here and how much it might cost you. But you're going to want to stay tuned for some surprises along the way, because there's some things that aren't actually that expensive in Vancouver that you might find cheaper in Vancouver than most other places. And we're going to get into all of that right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here and spending a little bit of time with me. If you're new to the channel, this channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver. Every single week I put out videos just like this one, and this week we're doing a deep dive into the cost of living in Vancouver. Before we get into that cost of living, I want us to get a baseline understanding of what people earn in Vancouver. And to do that, I tried to find as accurate and recent data as I possibly could. What I came up with was the average household income in 2021. This is from CMHC. It's $117,300 in Vancouver. That works out to roughly $9,775. Now, obviously, not everybody is earning that. That is the average. What is the minimum that somebody can earn in Vancouver? Well, that is now $17.40. That is the minimum wage in BC as of June of 2024. That's not going to get you very far, as we're going to learn, but let's get further into the cost of living so you can figure out, based on your income, whether this is an affordable place for you. All right, so let's get right into transportation. And when we're talking about transportation, I think it's important to understand that you do have the option to live without a car in Vancouver. And that can save you a lot of money if you're looking for ways to save money. This is a city where a car is not really required, which is something a lot of people moving from other places are blown away by and just kind of assume that they need a vehicle. Now, it does depend on where exactly in Metro Vancouver you are living. And it's certainly much easier to live in the center of Vancouver, in downtown Vancouver, without a car than it is to live in a city like Chilliwack, in a distant suburb, without a vehicle. But the non-car options, let's get into those. So public transit, one zone, it's broken up into zones depending on how far you're going to travel, but a one trip pass is $3.20. For a monthly Compass card, a monthly pass, that is $107.30. And it works its way all the way up to a 3-zone pass that is $193.80. And that's pretty much going to get you anywhere that the TransLink service offers in Metro Vancouver. It's a really reliable, inexpensive way to get around the city. Next would be the West Coast Express. If you want to go a little further, you want to live a little further away, this is the commuter rail option, and it runs from as close as Port Moody into downtown Vancouver, but as far as Mission into downtown Vancouver. They are also talking about potentially expanding it, maybe as far as Chilliwack. But at the moment, a single trip would cost you $8.20 on the West Coast Express. Again, they break this into zones. It can go from a monthly pass of $173.85 all the way up, if you're living all the way out in Mission and wanting to get into downtown Vancouver, all the way up to $375.40. They also have really convenient parking options around the West Coast Express stations, and I believe it's $60 a month to have a parking pass. So you can drive to the station and then jump on the train, come into work, and do some work on the train or catch up on YouTube videos like this one. It's a really nice option. Then there's also car sharing options. Now, to be honest, I have 4 children. I can't get away from having a car, but if I was single or it was just me and my wife, I think I could do without a car, especially because of car sharing. So we have Moto and we have Evo. This data, these prices are from Evo specifically, but it costs 50 cents a minute, $18 an hour, or $105 a day. And the great thing about the car sharing options is there is no point where you have to leave the car. There's not like a lot that it has to go to. You can pick up in one location and you can drive it to another and drop it off there and just check out and you're done. So I find it's really convenient. If I'm going out and meeting some friends downtown, I want to get there quickly. I don't want to rely on Uber or a taxi or something. I can just get downtown really quickly, drop off the car, and I don't have to worry about paying for the exorbitant amount of parking that park. So it's a much cheaper way for me to get downtown than anything else. Then we also have a bike share in Vancouver, and in Vancouver it is Mobi. It's $1 to unlock. It's 29 cents a minute. There's a $3 minimum. There are monthly options as well. You can pay $49 a month or $169 a year. When you're paying $49 a month, you get any trip under 30 minutes is free. You pay a per minute rental after that. With the $169 yearly pass, you get up to an hour included in that. And then you're paying per minute beyond that. So that's another great option for a lot of people, sort of shorter trips, most likely. And then there's the scooter share. This is just started. This is Lime. It's $1.25 to unlock. It's 39 cents a minute. But keep in mind that right now in 2024, in the fall of 2024, there are relatively limited options, locations for Lime. And they are doing it similar to the way that we do Mobi. It's not a drop off wherever you want. There are stations where you have to bring the bike or the scooter from one station to another station. And you have to find a spot in that location to be able to drop it off. So not totally ideal, but I can see I'm kind of excited about the scooter option because, again, if I was to take a car share into downtown, I don't really want to be fighting traffic to get from one side of downtown to another, or from one location, one appointment to another. But I could see myself driving an Evo downtown and then jumping on a scooter for the shorter trips where I can just get onto a bike lane with the scooter, which I think is a really good option and will become pretty cost effective. And then, of course, the other thing to note is Vancouver's a really bikeable and walkable city. And so depending on how far you're going and where you're going exactly, there's lots of cheap ways to get around just using your feet. The city of Vancouver is just 110 square kilometers. Downtown Vancouver is less than 4 square kilometers. And so you're going to find, if you live downtown, as an example, that you can probably just walk from one side of downtown to the other. If you live in Yaletown, right against the water, or in the West End, and you work in the center of downtown, you can definitely walk if you want to. And being such a walkable city, and a city where you don't really need to be car reliant, that is one way that Vancouver can save you money versus living in what is considered to be a cheaper city where you're going to be much more car reliant. But if you want a car, or you're living in a part of Vancouver where you need a car, or you have a huge family like I do, and you definitely need to have a car to pack all your minions in the car, well, I've got you covered as well. So gas in Vancouver, this is something where this is one of the more expensive things that you're going to find. Not in comparison globally, definitely not in comparison to Europe, but in comparison to most of the rest of North America, we have some of the highest gas prices. And at the moment, I think I saw last night, it was 167.5. Now it's come down considerably. A few months ago, we were drifting well over $2. It was $2.25, I think, a liter. But the reason that our gas prices are so high, big reason, is that our taxes are quite considerable. And a lot of our transportation network is based on, is paid for by gas taxes. And so at the moment, our gas taxes are 62 cents of that $1.67.5, approximately, in that range. It's based on the BC Utilities Commission. This is right at the top of prices in all of Canada and in North America. We're roughly about 25% higher than prices just about anywhere else in Canada. It's not just because of those taxes. It's actually also because we're reliant on just 2 oil refineries. And one of those being a local refinery. It just doesn't produce enough. And so we often have to bring gas over from across the border. And we're just not really self-sufficient when it comes to gas. And so we're sort of prone to seeing, if there's an issue with one of the refineries, the prices get pushed up along with the taxes. This is a mix for us to have pretty considerable high gas prices. And as a result, one of the interesting facts about Vancouver is you see really high adoption of electric vehicles. We have a lot of Teslas on the road and a lot of other electric vehicles because people are trying to find ways to save some money. And part of that is an environmental consciousness, but it's also about not paying the high fees that we have to pay at the gas pump. Of course, I mentioned earlier about parking downtown, and one of those things for me, a motivation not to take a car downtown. Well, you are going to find that typically parking in Vancouver is anywhere from 50 cents an hour to $7 an hour. And it's pushing up even higher beyond that. And so that would be street parking, that 50 cent to $7 an hour. But if you're off street and you are trying to find sort of a monthly parking option, those exist less and less common. You're going to be paying somewhere around $200 to $250 a month for your own personal parking spot. So this is a considerable expense and a reason that a lot of people choose not to commute to highly densely populated areas like downtown Vancouver by car. One is all the traffic. Two would be the cost of gasoline, but three is really the challenge of getting parking and the cost of paying for parking. So it really it's starting to make less and less sense to drive into those areas. Car insurance is one of the big expenses in owning a car, of course, as well. And, at the moment, you're paying on average close to $2,000 a year. Just shy of that, it's $1,832 according to ICBC, which works out to $153 a month. Now, it is going to depend a lot on how much experience you have as a driver and where exactly you live. Brand new drivers in an area like the West End, you might be paying as high as $5,500, $6,000 a month. Where a more experienced driver might be paying in an area like that, maybe it's $2,500 a month. My own personal insurance is, I've been driving for over 30 years. I have a very clean record. I don't have a super fancy car, but it is for business. And so I'm paying, I think, about $2,600 a year for my insurance at the moment. So now let's talk about groceries. After all, we all have to eat. Sometimes I wish my kids would eat a little bit less or waste a little bit less food. But let's not talk about me. Let's talk about you. If you are single in Vancouver, you're typically going to be looking at spending somewhere in the range of $300 to $400 a month in groceries. Of course, these numbers vary considerably. Like, are you vegan? Are you eating a keto diet and only eating meat? Do you want organic food only? All those types of things are going to play into how much you're spending. So as an individual, $300 to $400. As a family of four, you're typically looking at somewhere in the range of $1,000 to $1,200 a month. And that is also going to depend on how old those people are. I mean, in my family, I have four children, a 9-year-old, 5-year-old, and then 3-year-old twins. And obviously the twins don't eat nearly as much as a 9-year-old. And shockingly, my 9-year-old boy now is eating almost as much as I do. So this is going to become really expensive for me. I'm going to be spending a lot more than $1,200 a month, unfortunately. If you are looking for ways of saving money in groceries, I think you don't want to be shopping in sort of the name brand grocers. Like, don't go to Save on Foods. Shocker, you don't actually save on foods at Save on Foods. The areas that you're going to be finding you're going to save some money is if you're going to a local butcher, if you're going to a local grocer, and more often than not, it's those ethnic grocers where you're going to really save money. It is frankly a little bit shocking, where I see the prices for an apple at $4 a pound at Save on Foods. And that same apple might be $1.25 a pound at the ethnic grocer. So those are decisions you might want to make and ways that you might be able to save some money. Another thing to keep in mind is if you're eating things that are in season, like if you love fruits and vegetables, well, eat the things that are in season and don't pay for the things that get shipped from, New Zealand or Israel way off season. Like, obviously that's going to cost a lot more money. And that's something I'm struggling with my own family. It's like, we don't need to be eating raspberries in December. Let's eat raspberries at the time of year that they're actually in season. They're local. There's not as much of an impact on the environment. All those types of good things. There are ways to sort of be a little more reasonable and a little more frugal. There's also a lot of ways to spend crazy amounts of money if you want to on groceries. I don't just give tips on saving money on groceries. I also give tips on buying real estate. In fact, that's what I do. I've helped hundreds of people move to Vancouver. I can help you as well. If you're thinking of moving to Vancouver, if you're thinking of finding a new home, whether you're buying or selling, be sure to reach out anytime. My contact information is right there on the screen. We can get that ball rolling, get that conversation started whenever you're ready. But for now, let's get back to the video. So aside from groceries, lots of people love to eat out. And Vancouver is one of those cities where we have an abundance of options, basically at every economic level. Whether you want to spend a little money or a lot money, you can do that. And the quality is really phenomenal. I mean, there's the typical fast food options, whether it's I don't know, McDonald's or A&W or Wendy's. When you go to those places, I mean, they are becoming more and more expensive. It is tough to get a meal at one of those restaurants for less than $15. But that's fairly typical, sort of whether you're in Vancouver or whether you're in Toronto. It's kind of a cross Canada phenomenon. An inexpensive meal, sort of these hole-in-the-wall places, whether it's sushi or pizza, donair or shawarma. Shawarma, incidentally, is my go-to, something, you know, that I really enjoy if I'm looking for an inexpensive sort of quick meal as I'm on the go somewhere. But you're looking typically getting close to 20 bucks, maybe slightly over $20 for one of those inexpensive meals. And this is something I would say, you know, that is one of the areas that Vancouver really shines is in these inexpensive meal options, and in particular sushi. Sushi is one of those things in Vancouver you're going to find is cheaper than just about anywhere else and better quality than just about anywhere else. I mean, there's people that come from Japan to eat sushi in Vancouver, and we have some really long-standing history around sushi and a lot of competition between restaurants. And then, of course, we have the access to phenomenal seafood, which I think also helps. But that is one thing. If you love sushi, Vancouver is the place to come, and you can get really high quality, relatively inexpensive sushi here in Vancouver, which can surprise a lot of people. Now, in terms of mid-range meals, you're going to be looking at somewhere around 50 bucks. It's, you know, you might be paying $35 a plate. You get a drink with that and tip and taxes, getting up to $50 really quick. That doesn't include an appetizer. It doesn't include dessert of any kind, but that's sort of a bare bones sort of mid-range meal at a pretty typical, nothing fancy restaurant. And then, of course, we do have fancy restaurants, and there's quite a number of them. Finally, Michelin actually recognized Vancouver as having Michelin-starred restaurants. So they're smattered around the city. And in those restaurants, if you can get a table, highly recommend trying a few of them, even if it is just for a drink or an appetizer. One of my favorites just down the street for me is Published. It is a little bit more money than I would typically like to spend. But once in a while, my wife and I go there for a drink and an appetizer or something a little more frequently than we would going there to eat a full meal. But in those places, you're spending well over $100, and you could easily be spending, you know, $200, $250, especially when you're including things like, you know, an appetizer and a couple glasses of wine and all of the things that come with it. But the thing to note about eating out in Vancouver is that you have tons of options. There are very inexpensive options that are available to you. The quality is good, the food is fresh, and then you can also find really exceptional sort of world-class dining in Vancouver as well. Whatever your budget is, you can find it here in Vancouver in terms of dining out. Before we get too much further, I want to remind you towards the end of the video, I'm going to do a really deep dive on real estate, housing in Vancouver, both renting and buying. But for now, let's talk about utilities. So in terms of utilities, this is another area that Vancouver is relatively inexpensive. It's not the cheapest in North America, but in terms of electricity specifically, of 60 utilities in all of North America, British Columbia is one of the cheapest three. Quebec and Manitoba, I believe, are cheaper, but Vancouver and British Columbia in general, we have BC Hydro. Because of our hydropower, we're not reliant on expensive ways of producing electricity. The result is things are pretty darn cheap when it comes to electricity. It depends on your household size. It depends on the size of your home and how many people are in it. And are you crypto mining as an example? Well, your bills can get much more expensive. But personally, I spend around $100, $120 a month, and that's a family of 6, and we have a suite with 2 more people in it. In my mind, that's pretty darn cheap. It is about a third less expensive than the national average. And by all accounts, it's like 1/5 of what you might find in a place like Germany or the UK, where prices are really, really high because they're much more reliant on much more expensive ways of producing electricity. So there is a movement to put more and more on our electrical grid and away from something like natural gas. And natural gas is something that we've traditionally used for the last 60 years or so for heating in particular. And you're going to find a lot of homes have forced air furnaces, their hot water tanks are going to be natural gas, and stoves are quite frequently natural gas as well. And those things we're moving away from, going to electricity. But natural gas is relatively inexpensive as well. And my natural gas bill in my house, it's roughly 2,900 square feet. Again, there's 8 people living in it. And our natural gas bills are on average about $100 a month. And again, really, really reasonable. And you hear about these horror stories in some other parts of North America where people are really, they're struggling, that these numbers can go in the thousands for some people in some areas, depending on what's going on and how regulated the electric system and gas system is, the utility system, I should say. We are regulated, prices are regulated by the government, and the result is it's not super expensive, and it's not something that you need to worry too much about when you're purchasing a home. Whether your bills are relatively high or relatively low, they're still relatively affordable compared to what most people are paying in other parts of the world. Speaking of what most other people are paying in other parts of the world, one area where we are not saving money, I can guarantee you, is cell phone bills. And in a typical cell phone bill is probably in the $60 to $80 a month range. And it's going to depend, are you paying off a cell phone with that? What kind of service are you expecting? Things are getting more reasonable than they used to be. I think the difference used to be much more stark than it is now, but I have been seeing deals where you're getting like 100 gigabytes of data, and you can use it not just in Canada, but in the US and Mexico as well. And that might cost you in that price range if you're starting a new plan with a new company today. But many of us that still have these legacy plans, I think I am paying around $50 a month, and it's 20 or 30 gigabytes, and it's only in Canada. So when I cross the border into the United States, I am gouged with a plan that allows me to use the same data and my same phone number when I'm in the States. Same thing when you go to Europe. There's ways to avoid that, of course, but keep in mind, if you're coming from somewhere else outside of Canada, you're not going to be used to this. And if you're coming from Asia, if you're coming from Europe, and you're coming from basically anywhere other than Canada, these prices are high. And for relatively little. The other area that we're paying a relatively high amount would be for your home internet access. And most people are paying somewhere around the $80 mark. And you're getting that service, whether it's from a phone company or a telecommunications company, I should say, or a cable company. But roughly $100 a month for high-speed internet is what you could probably be budgeting. Now I'm going to talk about some things that are specific to owning and specific to renting. With owning in particular, what you should be aware of if you are not owning a house, if you're not owning a detached house and owning a condo or a strata in particular, you have to pay a monthly maintenance fee in addition to what you're paying for the property itself. Now, this is an area that is actually more budget friendly than many other parts of North America. Maintenance fees in BC are relatively low, and there's a number of reasons for that. I'm not going to get into them too much right now, but on average, you might be paying somewhere around $400 a month. Now, it absolutely depends on how big of a unit you have and how old your building is and what kind of amenities there are in it. And you need to talk to a realtor like me about what those potential costs might be. But you do need to be aware that they exist if you own in a strata. Of course, if you own a detached home or a property that's not in a strata, you may not have a forced payment every single month, but you should be putting some money aside for future expenses, like if your roof goes or if your furnace blows or something like that. They need to be replaced. There's expenses for owning anything, which is one of the advantages of renting, of course. And it's not your responsibility if something goes wrong. But when you are renting, one of the things that you should consider when you're comparing different types of rentals is that there could be rentals that include utilities and there could be some that don't. And if you're coming here from somewhere else, keep in mind, it might not be as much of a savings as you think it will be. Like if you're coming from Texas to Canada to BC, well, you may think that that including utilities is an extraordinary expense because your utility expenses are incredibly high. But you will typically be paying a little bit more for the rentals that include utilities than the ones that don't. But it can be an advantage. And that's something that you want. You want to be sure that you're comparing apples to apples, of course, when you're comparing rental costs. Okay, now we're going to get into some fun stuff, some leisure and entertainment expenses, just so you're aware of what you could be expecting depending on what you like to do. But so a typical movie in Vancouver, you're going to go to the latest blockbuster. Does anybody go to movies anymore? I don't know. I don't. But if you want to, no shame. $15 is your typical expense for going out to a movie in Vancouver. You can pay a lot more for fancier seats and fancier service and that type of thing. But typically you're looking at about $15. A latte is about $6. Pro tip, get a espresso machine at home. I purchased one a couple of years ago. I thought it was a pretty extravagant expense. But my goodness, my wife and I have saved so much money with our own latte machine, our own espresso machine at home, and not going out all the time and grabbing a coffee on the go. But if you want to buy one on the go and it's kind of a fun part of your day, you're looking at about $6, give or take a little bit. Usually take a little bit. Usually, if anything, it's going to be a little more expensive than that. And a drink is going to cost you somewhere around 15 to 20 bucks, depending on where you're going. I mentioned published a little while ago. Well, you're probably going to be paying over $20 for that drink there. But if you go to a typical bar, a typical spot is going to cost roughly $15. A beer is usually about $8. And after that beer, if you don't just want to sit there and hang out with your friends and you want to go to a sporting event, well, we do have you covered. There's all sorts of sports in Vancouver, of course. Let's start with the most expensive. That would be the Vancouver Canucks. They're exciting again. And of course, when things get exciting, well, they become more expensive. So for a few years, prices were getting relatively reasonable, but they've started to they're creeping up once again. $80 a ticket is kind of your baseline, and you're looking at least, and that would be nosebleed section. I mean, I remember not that far long ago with half that. These days you're paying about $80 for that. And for the better seats, sort of lower bowl, not the best seats, you're looking at about $150. And the sky is really the limit from there, and how much you pay, depending on who's in town, of course, and how close to the ice and how good those seats are. Let's not talk about the cost of beer at a Canucks game. I'm going to move on from there. Talking about the Whitecaps, the Vancouver Whitecaps are a super popular option. That is our soccer team. And that is one of the more affordable options. You're looking at somewhere around $30 for most tickets, but you could pay for really good seats for some of the premier teams. You could be getting close to $100. It could be 85 bucks. And one of my favorite local sports is the Vancouver Canadians. They are a minor league baseball team, and they play in one of the most gorgeous facilities that you're gonna find. It's a fantastic experience. Tickets are really, really, really reasonable. It's fun to go with your friends. It's fun to go with your family as well. And it's just down the street for me, so I love going. You're looking at about 20 bucks for a ticket, sort of like typical ticket. But the fancier ones, you might be paying double that, 45 bucks at the most, really, I think is where they're at these days. Then we have a CFL team, the BC Lions. And the BC Lions, honestly, I haven't been paying too much attention to lately. It's been a long time since I have, but they are incredibly popular. And this is something that is becoming more and more popular for families because it is so cost effective. It is just $15 a ticket, which seems crazy to me in a city as big as we are, that more people don't go and check out CFL football games and watch the BC Lions. I myself am going to be watching the Grey Cup for the first time ever. I'm super excited. We are hosting it in Vancouver, and I happened to spring for tickets this year. They weren't in the budget. They're a little bit more expensive than $15 a ticket. But it's one of those experiences. You got to go see, a Stanley Cup final hockey game, have poutine, you got to try maple syrup taffy, and you got to go check out a Grey Cup football game, right? Am I right? So I'm super excited about that. Perhaps you are too. I'll tell you all about it when it happens. Then there's all sorts of family activities that you might want to consider. There's things like Science World and the aquarium. These are not inexpensive things, and they're geared a little more towards tourists. That's where they really get you if you just show up for a day and get a day pass to these things. So Science World's going to get you for $35 a visit, but it becomes really reasonable once you start looking at family passes. An annual pass, that would be about $254 today. For the Vancouver Aquarium, it's $42 for an adult to get in. The aquarium is phenomenal and a lot of fun. I mean, I've been going there since I was a little kid, but I would recommend a family pass, and that will be $260 a year. We had that when I was a kid. I haven't done it with my family yet, but I'm just waiting for my kids to get a little bit older. But I do love the aquarium. It's an amazing way to get an insight into what's going on in our local ecology, but also some stuff that we don't see too often, like, I don't know, tarantulas and barracudas and sloths. I love the sloths at the aquarium. And then what about kids' activities? Well, kids' activities are expensive and they're really, really hard to get into. That is sort of one of the things that we're not great at in Vancouver. It is one of the things that drives people out of Vancouver. Just trying to get your kid into something as simple as swimming lessons is so incredibly hard. And when you have more than one child, it becomes a bit of a nightmare. But let's talk about costs. So a season of soccer for a kid could cost $500. A gymnastics program could cost you, for a 6-week program, $400. Swimming lessons sort of through the Vancouver Community Center system is about $60. And summer camps, you're looking at about $150 a week for sort of the bare bones community center programs, which, a hint, that is one of the most cost-effective ways to have your kids busy through the summer months. I think they're really phenomenal. And I've been sending my two older kids to those programs for the last few years. They're great. But if you want more specialized programs, those exist as well, somewhere in the range of $300 to $500. And I suppose really the sky's the limit. I mean, it might be baseball, it might be soccer, could be horse riding or golf or something like that. And of course, things become much more expensive. The thing to look out with those activities is how much time they're in the camp. And I often wonder about that because like those community center camps, they're essentially a more than a school day. They will have them from 8:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon, where some of the sports camps are as little as 2 hours a day. And that's not really a day camp. That doesn't allow me to go to work, right? And when they're that expensive, that's not as cost effective per hour. So something to consider when you're looking at those programs. And there we go. Those are the leisure and entertainment expenses to give you an idea of what your budget might be like when you're here in Vancouver. Now we're getting closer to the housing question. And don't forget, I am a realtor. If you need one, my contact information is right there on the screen. But first, we're going to talk about childcare. And childcare is something that not everybody's going to need. But if you are moving here or already here with kids, you want to be aware, or you're thinking of having kids, how much this can impact your budget. It can be an enormous impact on your budget. There was a point, I had 3 children in daycare. There were no subsidies. There were no government subsidies. And I was paying around $6,000 a month for 3 full-time spots. And it was insane, but we had to do it. Both my wife and I work full-time and we don't have the capacity to look after our children through the daytime. So they were in daycare. We did that for a while, but thankfully they're not all in daycare anymore. At this point, 2 of them have moved on to public school and the other 2 are still in daycare. In Vancouver, you could still be paying up to $2,000 a month for daycare, and it's more expensive for the infants, and it's more expensive if there is not just that full-time care, but they're also feeding your children. And that's a budget decision you may have. Personally, I kind of find it annoying to have to make lunches every morning. I can't wait till my kids are old enough to make their own lunches. And there was a period where a couple of my kids went to a daycare that included lunches and food and everything, and that was phenomenal. But of course, it costs money. So if you're looking to save money, don't send them to those daycares. The thing about the cost of daycare is we just feel we're lucky to get into any daycare. The daycare spots are really limited, and the competition to get into them is so fierce that many families aren't all that budget conscious about the daycares they get into. They're just happy to be in one. And that was kind of the position that we were in when we were paying $6,000 a month. I mean, it wasn't within our budget. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, but it was kind of what we had to do for a period of time until we found less expensive options. These days, what you are typically going to be paying is about $400 a month for a toddler, and it's about $600 a month for an infant. And these numbers have come down really significantly because there are subsidies that the provincial government has put in place in the last few years. So they are subsidizing spots for just about every daycare. And then there are increasingly $10 a day spots as well. So I think the number now is 15,300 $10 a day spots, and they're targeting, I think by 2026, 20,000. And they say that they're on target for that. So many families are finding themselves in those $10 a day spots, trying to find them if they don't have them. Of course, those spots are the ones that are most heavily in demand, the hardest to get into. But when you get them, it's like winning the lottery. It is a real budget saver. Those daycare spots, if you are able to get them, that is one of the more affordable things about living in Vancouver. The trouble is just being able to get into those spots. That is not a guarantee, unfortunately. And a lot of people tend to drive pretty big distances and do some inconvenient things in their lives to make sure that their kids are cared for when they need to be. And now let's talk a little bit about education. And if you're moving here from somewhere else, what you're not going to fully understand is just how good our public school system is. And I do have a video that I did a little while ago. It's going to be right there. I'll link it for you, all about finding good schools in Vancouver. But the main takeaway is that you don't really need to worry that much about the public school system. If you're in one catchment, it's not night and day to the catchment that's right beside it. I myself am a graduate of the public school system in Vancouver. Many successful people in Vancouver graduated from public schools. Many of us put our own children in public schools, and I do personally, and I am happy to do so. I'm happy with the quality of education that they're getting. So the cost of that, I'm not paying out of pocket anything directly. I do pay indirectly for it, or perhaps I guess that's arguably also directly, but a tax. It's coming out of my taxes, right? I am paying for it. We are all collectively paying for the next generation to be educated and educated well. But if you are looking for private schools, those do exist as well. And so that you're aware of the expense, you can go anywhere from, now I'm going to divide this into boys and girls, but St. George's would be the boys' school that is sort of at the top end. For, I think it's the secondary school, it's now $34,300, slightly less if they're in primary. Vancouver College would be at the cheaper end of the private school option for boys, and that is now $9,300 a year. And for girls, at the top end is Crofton House, that is $31,300. And Little Flower Academy is at the lower end, and that is similar to Vancouver College, where it is $9,600 a year. So not only are these places expensive, but also keep in mind that there are very limited spaces, and there are lots of people, our population is growing. There's lots of people that want to send their kids to those schools. So there's no guarantee that there's going to be a spot. There is an entrance exam, essentially. Partially, they end up deciding whether or not the child is sort of an appropriate fit. But I think a bigger part of it is often they're testing if you, the parents and the family, are going to be a fit for the institution. So something to be aware of. You not only have to pay the money, but you also have to jump through some hoops to be able to get into those schools. But I do think this is one of the affordable things in comparison to much of the rest of the world. And it's also the quality that is really outstanding in comparison to most of the rest of the world. Not only is Canada considered one of the best education systems globally, but British Columbia is considered one of the best education systems in Canada. In the world, it's free. You don't have to pay out of pocket for it. I'm going to touch on healthcare just a little bit. So if you are moving here from other parts of the world, that you understand, we do have socialized healthcare in British Columbia. It is regulated provincially. So that again is paid for through our taxes. And a lot of our tax dollars are going to supporting our public healthcare system. You can have personal health insurance that's sort of an addition to your public healthcare. But it's not a requirement. If you get sick, if you get ill in any way, hurt in any way, you can go see a doctor and that is going to be covered for you. What isn't covered typically under those programs is eyesight and teeth. I know that the dental program is starting to be absorbed into the public system in BC. I think it's going to be income tested, but we're moving towards something that where, a certain part of our population will have dental care as well. But eyesight, if you, like me, I'm not quite blind as a bat, but I'm moving there as I get older. And that's something that is an out-of-pocket expense. Many employers will have healthcare insurance that will sort of add on to the public system. So you'll get covered for your eyes and your teeth, which can be an advantage, especially if you have children. And again, as many children as I have, my wife happens to have a very good, solid plan with her employer that I, as a self-employed person, do not have. So that can be an advantage, but it's not as much of an advantage as it would be in a place like the United States that doesn't have the kind of public healthcare system that we do here in Canada. So A few things to keep in mind about healthcare and healthcare expenses. I suppose another part of that would be the drug expenses. So if you are on medication, there is a very limited number of medications that would be covered under the public healthcare system. And that is another one of those advantages. If you are on a private plan, that can subsidize your medication costs quite substantially if you do get sick or do end up requiring some kind of medication. Okay, and now we're getting to housing. And housing for most people just about everywhere is one of the biggest parts of your budget. The recommendation is that it's approximately 30% of your income is spent on housing. In Vancouver, it's unfortunately not all that unusual to be spending considerably more. And 40, 50, even 60% of people's income is being spent on housing. You can overspend and you can find better values. And I'm going to try and talk a little bit about that here. But first of all, let's talk about rent in Vancouver in 2024. This is according to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC. At the moment in the fall of 2024, a typical one-bedroom apartment is going for $2,750. A typical two-bedroom is $4,050 in rent. A typical three-bedroom, and this is more likely to be a townhouse in Vancouver than it is to be a condominium, but a typical three-bedroom is $5,610. So not inexpensive. But the other thing to keep in mind is the vacancy rate is incredibly low. So we hover around 1% vacancy rate. Right now it's 0.9%, and depending on where you are in Metro Vancouver, it's going to be a little bit higher, a little bit lower. So in downtown Vancouver at the moment, it is 1.4%. So it is a little bit on the higher end. Whereas in West Vancouver, the suburb, the municipality on the other side of English Bay to the west, as you go up to Squamish and to Whistler, over there is 0.7%. So very, very low. Kitsilano is 0.9%. And then at the high end, city of Surrey, suburb, as we go a little further east out of Vancouver, that is 1.6%. And incidentally, an area like that is one of the areas in Surrey where things are going to be a little more affordable. You're not going to be paying this $2,750 for a one bedroom. Those are downtown Vancouver rents. They are not Surrey rents. And the further out you go, the more likely that you're going to be saving some money here. Other ways of saving money would be considering basement suites. These are not incorporated into these numbers. And so many houses in Vancouver that are detached homes, people are renting the lower half, the basement. It's not always a basement. And in my particular case, I live in a Vancouver Special, which is a house that I did a video on a little while ago. Be sure to check that out if you're curious. But their quote unquote basements are above ground. They're at grade and they have full height basements. They're 8 feet ceiling. So being in the basement in one of those houses is actually quite nice. It's just like being on the ground floor apartment, and you can have your own door, you can have your own laundry. Of course, there is somebody above you. With houses, that is one of the drawbacks, is that people can hear one another much more than they can in an apartment building or a condo building. But really, when you're living with other people, this is kind of always an issue. And speaking of, that's another way that people are finding to make things more affordable. And I feel like that's a time-tested tradition of just people living together. So rather than moving here as a student or a young professional starting out and expecting that you're gonna, have your own place, well, many people decide, I'm gonna live with a few other people, and they look for shared accommodations and maybe living with 2, 3, 5 other people, depending on the size of the home. And that is a way to save a lot of money. But if you are thinking of renting and you're moving here, well, unfortunately, it's not something that I can help you with. I can't professionally give you assistance. I did make a video just for you. I'm going to link that right up there. And that's all about the system of rentals in Vancouver, so you know what you're getting into. But let's move on to ownership and what that looks like. And in Vancouver, a typical one-bedroom condo is around $700,000. And sort of a rule of thumb is that you're going to be looking at least $1,000 per square foot for something that has any kind of quality. And it can move, higher floors, a little more luxurious. You could be right at about $1,200 a square foot, but really the sky becomes the limit in terms of luxury, and you could be spending $2,000 to $3,000 a square foot. But the benchmark is somewhere in that $1,000 to $1,200 dollars per square foot. And so you can imagine a 700 square foot one bedroom is around 600 square feet. You know, it might be 580, it might be 650, but in that kind of ballpark for something that is newer and good quality where you're not really going to need to worry about the building and it's in a good location and generally has a good reputation. Two bedrooms, on the other hand, are going to cost you more money because we're talking more space. And typically a decent two bedroom is around $900,000. And again, this is sort of in the ballpark of around 800 square feet. That's what's typical in our market for a condo, which is what we're talking about here. And you can see how this has sort of behaved over time. You know, condos have been sort of moving sideways. We've had a couple peaks and a couple valleys. First peak in recent memory was really sort of just before interest rates started to increase. And then we have some valleys depending on the market exactly, but typically sort of towards the tail end of 2023, some point between July and December of that year, most of our markets and most of our housing types kind of had an issue because interest rates were climbing so much. And then they recovered a bit at the beginning of 2023 until we got a couple surprise interest rate hikes in June and July of that year that once again sort of put a peak into the market and prices came down until the rhetoric started to becoming much more positive. And that's kind of where we find ourselves today. So the last couple of years, we've kind of been waffling with all sorts of government interventions and taxes and government at all levels trying to make things more affordable. But most specifically, we've had the interest rates tightening and concerns over where that might be going. And whenever that kind of has eased, well, the prices start to mount as people come back into the market. And that is where we kind of find ourselves right now. There's this moment where it's becoming clear that interest rates are on the decline. At least that's what we collectively believe. I mean, whether we can believe the Bank of Canada or not, I think at this point we're all a little gun shy. But that is the rhetoric that we're hearing, that we should be seeing some significant interest rate declines in the coming months. And many people believe that this is going to lead to price increases pretty substantially in the coming months, as we've been sort of flat or sideways in the last couple of years. But moving on, 3 bedrooms, which are typically townhouses in Vancouver, you're looking at about 1.5 million. I mean, give or take, depending on the size, depending on the location and how new they are, you might be spending, you know, $200,000 less, or you might be spending $500,000 more if it's big and on the west side in a really desirable neighborhood. In terms of houses, you're looking at about $2 million in Vancouver. This is a relatively affordable home, nothing special, in a decent area. Of course, there are more expensive areas and there are cheaper areas, and you can save money by buying something that's older on a smaller lot in a less desirable neighborhood. Those are all ways that you could save money. And of course, you can make your house much more affordable, as I personally do, by having a suite in your house and having a tenant, and then that then contributes to the mortgage and helps you pay down that mortgage. And that's something that's really, really common in Vancouver. So to give you an idea of the cost of ownership these days, so let's just sort of split it down the middle. This isn't particularly high or particularly low. But if you are looking at purchasing, let's say it's a 3-bedroom townhouse at $1.5 million, you would need, let's say you're putting 20% down, that would be $300,000. So first of all, you need to save a lot of money. That's not within everybody's capability, but you know, those are the figures that I'm using for this. So you would have a mortgage of $1.2 million, and at a 5-year fixed interest rate, one of the better rates that you could find right now, and this isn't the best rate, it's not the worst, but 4.69%. That's what I just found. What that works out to on that mortgage of 1.2 million is $6,769 per month. And that is to pay down your mortgage. Now remember, this 3-bedroom renting would cost you close to $6,000. So paying for it will cost you more than renting it in today's money. And that's where a little bit challenging. A lot of people are like trying to compare in today's market. Well, I can rent for cheaper than what it's going to cost me to buy. But the thing I think that a lot of people forget when they're making that calculation is how quickly and how high rents get. And also the fact that you have no security in your rental. You can get kicked out if the owner wants to take over that property. So a lot of people who have been renting for some time end up realizing, you know, if I can manage it, what I'd like to do is purchase a home. To make these things more affordable, what a lot of people do is they don't buy in the center of Vancouver. This is where prices are highest, of course. And so if you are willing to go outside of the city of Vancouver, which again is just one very small part of Metro Vancouver, it is only 110 square kilometers out of, it's approximately 2,600 square kilometers that Metro Vancouver is. There's lots of space, lots of places to go, and you can move out to areas like, Burnaby, North Vancouver, a little further afield going to Coquitlam or Port Coquitlam, New Westminster, then crossing the Fraser River and considering places like Maple Ridge, maybe even Mission, Abbotsford, Surrey, Langley. These are all much more affordable options. And if you go far enough, you could save up to roughly 50% off the numbers that I've been talking about. Of course, if you need to commute into the center of Vancouver, you need to calculate the value, not just of like the expense of driving and let's say the depreciation of your vehicle by driving so much. But I think one thing that many people forget in this calculation is how much time they are spending commuting or driving. And not just the value of your time, but also the value of your time to your family. Personally, that is why I have always made the decision to stay in the city. I feel like that is too much to pay for the amount of time I'd be spending in the car to move out to South Surrey or to move to Delta or somewhere like that when my work and my wife's work is here in the city. That becomes a personal decision. And if you don't need to make that commute, if you live in Langley and you work in Surrey, that makes much more sense that you do need to calculate these expenses in every aspect in sort of a holistic manner. That's something that I would remind everybody of as you're looking at these expenses. Now, let's talk about taxes. And this is a big part of your housing expense in most places in the world. It's not minute here in the Lower Mainland, but it is much smaller. This is another one of those ways that Vancouver and Metro Vancouver is a relatively less expensive place to live. We don't have insane property taxes that you can have. I find this is more common in the United States where they sort of offload. You don't have a state tax and then they'll get you because the cities need to fund themselves. They're not getting any money from the state, so they have to do it via property taxes. In British Columbia, we do have provincial property taxes and we also have a provincial sales tax. And some of that money gets spread out to the municipalities, but that's not quite enough. The municipalities need more money. And one of the ways that they fundraise where they pay for the expenses that they have is obviously from the property owners in the cities. That's their lever that they can adjust. It is increasingly being a lever that they're relying on more and more as our cities are growing faster and faster. And more amenities and utilities have to be provided for the amounts of people. The infrastructure has to be there for the people moving here. So as relatively low as these property taxes have been in recent years, they are moving up. And every municipality is saying, just warning, their constituents that they're not staying where they are, that they are going to be raising them, whether it's 5% here, 6% somewhere else, or 7% somewhere. But keep in mind, they're not crazy in terms of North American standards. We can look at how they compare across the region here in this handy little chart that I found. This is comparing properties at a $500,000 price point. But you can see Vancouver in terms of the region is relatively reasonable. We talk about a mill rate. We're just under $3 per $1,000 of value is the way that they charge. Where at the higher end, you might find yourself in New Westminster, that number gets up to just over $4 per $1,000. And how that would work out on that property we were considering buying at 1.5 million. In the city of Vancouver, you'd be paying on a $1.5 million assessed property, just shy of $4,500, $4,452.27 to be exact. And in New Westminster, that would be $6,128.36. So you're paying about $1,500 extra to live in New Westminster for similar assessed value. Now, just to compare how this looks in other parts of Canada specifically, I took a quick look around and just took two cities that we often compare ourselves to, or people are often thinking about moving to and from. Calgary, that same value, you'd be paying $9,729.15. That is over double what you're paying in Vancouver. And in Toronto, even higher, it's $10,729.34. So keep in mind, property taxes are a thing. They're expensive, but in Metro Vancouver, that's one of the things that you're going to find yourself paying less of than just about anywhere in North America. Now, I do hope that this kind of gave you a good overview of the cost of living in Vancouver. I have jumped around a fair amount. I hope you go back and check it all out and make sure that you fully understand what it might cost to live here if you were thinking of moving here. If you are thinking of moving here and you're thinking of purchasing a home, I am a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of people settle in Vancouver and not just find the right home, but also a home that's within their budget. And I'm happy to work with you on figuring out what that might be. I have great people on my team that can work through mortgage application with you and help figure out exactly where you should be based on your desires, your family's priorities, as well as your budget. If you're not quite ready to do that just yet, be sure to check out the many dozens of videos. I'm close to 100 videos now on my channel, and all these videos are made for you. They're free of charge. It's just information that I am unloading on you so that you can make the right choice about moving to Vancouver and moving within Vancouver. So every week I put out another video all about moving to and living in Vancouver. Videos just like this one, and this video has been the cost of living in Vancouver. If you are curious about delving a little deeper into the cost of living, I did a video that I had a lot of fun doing a little while ago, all about my personal cost of living, and I'm going to link it right there. I reveal all sorts of stuff about my own personal life and about the things that I spend money on, but check out that video. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you being here and sticking through this video. I really hope to see you on every subsequent video. Thank you so much. Bye for now.